Detective, when you were testifying, I believe that was on Tuesday, you were asked questions about the latent fingerprint examination of the fire cartridge cases in this case. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And as a detective, you said you have almost 30 years of experience as a police officer, correct?
Just past my 29th anniversary. Yes.
Okay. If I round you up to 1 year, we call it just approximately 30 years.
I appreciate it.
There. Okay. Do you have an understanding of what could potentially impact whether or not you would find a fingerprint on any panel?
Yes.
What are some of the factors that you're aware of?
Time in which it was processed, the exposure to the elements, rain, water, foot traffic, cars, depending on where it's at, wind, other weather events. I mean, anything, other people going through the area or touching vehicles. I mean, it just depends on where the item is going to be processed, with conditions it's found in, and how long it's exposed to those conditions.
What about temperature? Is that one of the things that would be potentially affected?
Yes.
Injection coding.
Would exposure of a fingerprint to something of high temperature potentially impact whether or not it's able to be located?
I think so.
You also said you've had extensive experience firing firearms, throughout your law enforcement career, correct?
Yes.
When a gun discharges a fire cartridge casing, when it first comes out of the gun, is it hot?
Yes, on a semi-automatic specifically, when it ejects the cartridges, just from personal experience, I've had them land on me. When we go to the police academy to shoot a qualified, we're on a line. So oftentimes the casings are ejected as the next person next to you is firing. So I've many times felt that the casing landed in my neck or in my collar, and they're hot.
In your nearly 30 years of experience, the 29 years of experience as a police officer, can you personally recall any cases of yours where fingerprints were developed from the fire cartridge case?
None that I can think of.
And you said you've worked on homicide cases, correct?
Yes, sir.
A fair number of those involve firearms.
I do majority, yes.
Can you give the jury any idea of how many cases you think you've handled over your career?
I mean, between homicide cases or cases involving firearms, as the lead investigator or assisting in investigations, probably to date, I would say probably in excess of 2,000 cases I've assisted or led.
You were asked similar questions about DNA evidence potentially on the fire cartridge case, correct?
Yes.
And based on your background and experience, do you have any idea of things that could impact whether or not DNA is present on an item?
I mean, along the same lines as fingerprints, exposure to the elements, contamination, anything from human contamination, vehicle, wherever it's exposed to, weather.
Could temperature also potentially impact it as well?
Yes.
In your almost 30 years experience as a police officer, can you personally recall any cases where DNA was developed on fire cartridge case in one of your cases?
Not that I can think of.
After the cartridge cases are booked, in your experience as a police officer, can they be made available to the defense if the defense wants to conduct their own independent investigation?
Yes.
In this case, could the defense have done their own DNA testing?
Yes.
On cross-examination, you were specifically asked if you observed any video of Mr. Efron returning to the crime scene the night of this incident. Was there any video in this case that you ever had possession of that was captured after 11:20 p.m., capturing specifically that intersection of Vista Del Mar and Selma?
No.
I want you to assume, for purposes of a hypothetical, that victim in a case returns to a crime scene at 11:45 p.m. Would the video that you recovered that only goes to 11:20, would that video have shown that person's presence at the scene?
No, it would not.
You were also asked about Mr. Efron's girlfriend returning to the scene. Assume the same hypothetical that she came back with that individual at 11:20. Would the video that you collected in this case, would it even show her?
At 11:20?
Sorry, if she returned with Mr. Efron at 11:45, the video that only goes up to 11:20 show her?
No.
Okay.
Objection, Your Honor. This is the fact, not evidence. It would just mean that they didn't.
Overruled. No speaking objections. Overruled.
Okay. On cross-examination.
No, stop. No editorializing by anybody. Ask another question, Mr. President.
Just want to move your honor, trying to organize this. In cross-examination, Mr. Tacopina asked you questions about your prior testimony at the preliminary hearing, and specifically read you a passage regarding whether or not you asked Mr. Efron if he had firearms back in November of 2021. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. In your testimony prior to that, were you asked,
Page 1.
page 269,
Which
on
volume?
5,
Which volume?
volume 2, Your Honor.
2.
2, yes.
Which, repeat the page, please.
269. I'm gonna first go 5 to 11, Your Honor.
Can you ask the question back?
On cross-examination, Mr. Tacopina asked you questions about your prior testimony at the preliminary hearing and specifically read you a passage regarding whether or not you asked Mr. Efron if he had firearms back in November of 2021. Do you recall that? Answer, yes. Question, your testimony prior to that, were you asked? And then, do you have a page number?
All right, what was the next question you were going to ask?
As you read the question he was asked on 5, you go through his answer.
That's not a prior inconsistent statement from what you said. Your question was, did he ask Efron? That's not what this question asked.
Now, I wasn't offering as a prior inconsistent statement.
Why don't you just ask the same question that you asked the preliminary hearing?
Did you ever look to see what firearms were registered to Mr. Efron
Yes.
at the time of the incident in November of 2021?
Yes.
And what did you discover when you searched for any guns that would be registered to him at that time?
We didn't find any firearms registered to Mr. Efron.
Okay. Okay. In your nearly 30 years of experience in law enforcement, have you ever conducted an interview with a significant witness in a case and either not recorded your interview or not taken notes and not written a report?
Yeah, no, I recall ever doing that.
As an investigator, can you tell the jury why you either record your interviews or take notes and then write a report immediately following your interviews?
I like to record because it's 100% accurate. The reports are done generally for our purposes as a summary, kind of as a refresher, to identify key points that were made during the interview. But again, my preference has always been to record because that's always 100% accurate.
Would you ever interview a witness and not record your interview or not write a report or not take any notes of that interview in your experience as an investigator?
Objection, Your Honor, relevant, whether you would or would not.
Make an offer of proof.
Well, but the first question is a significant witness, now you're asking any witness.
Okay, I
So, any witness, that question's irrelevant. The answer would be irrelevant.
Sure. Imagine a scenario where you interviewed somebody months prior. Hypothetically, you did not record this interview, you did not write a report, and you did not take any notes. Then months later, you go back and try to summarize what that witness told you. Is that something that and that witness is a significant witness in your case that you're investigating, is that something that a trained police officer such as yourself would ever do?
Objection, Your Honor, rules of speculation.
No,
Why not?
I mean, it's just not accurate. Again, my preference would be to record it, just so it's 100% accurate to go off that for any kind of summary.
Okay, in addition to going off of the summary, if you record your interviews in a case, are those also given to the district attorney?
Yes,
Would those also be given to the defense?
yes, no,
Would anyone involved in the case then have the opportunity to hear verbatim what questions you asked and what the answers were that were given?
correct.
Likewise, if you record your interviews, you said after you conduct an interview that you will summarize your interview in a police report, correct?
Yes, typically in the police report or as part of the case, yes.
In this case specifically, did you speak to Mr. Efron the day that you were assigned to this case?
Yes, on the November 9th, 2021, yes.
And did you record your interview with him in any way?
Yes, that was recorded, but it included myself, Detective Camacho, Detective Menifee.
Understood, but when you say it was recorded, was it an audio recording?
That was an audio recording because it was a telephonic interview.
And did the audio recording capture your voice and his voice?
It did.
Okay. When you later went back and, or not you, or when your partner, I believe you said, went back and summarized that interview, summarized it into a report, correct?
Correct.
And I believe that you testified that there were a few sentences in the report that had some inaccuracies, correct?
That is correct.
But that was the inaccuracies in the report, those were not things that Mr. Efron specifically said in the report. Were those inaccuracies in the report, or were those things that Mr. Efron said in the report?
There were inaccuracies in the report. Summary.
Okay. I believe you were specifically asked about whether after the shooting, Mr. Efron contacted an attorney before he returned to the scene to recover the gun casings located at Selma and Vista Del Mar. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And did Mr. Efron ever make that statement to you that he did things in that order?
That is not my recollection.
If Mr. Efron testified that he first collected the cartridge cases and then he contacted an attorney, did he ever tell you anything directly contradictory to that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah, if Mr. Efron testified that he first went to the scene and collected the cartridge cases and he contacted an attorney at some point after that, did he ever say anything to you that was different from that order?
No.
I believe you were also asked about the line in a report in which it was written that Mr. Efron said that Bills had a knife. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Did Mr. Efron ever make that statement to you?
No,
Was that just an inaccuracy in the summary of the report?
that's correct, it was an inaccuracy.
When you were also asked if that essentially you knew that there was that inaccuracy in the report prior to your testimony today, correct?
Correct,
And you were asked if you ever went back to correct that police report, correct?
correct,
Did you testify under oath at a prior hearing in November 2023 at the preliminary hearing to that inaccuracy?
yes, I did.
So did you tell the court, the DA, and the defense that that line in your report that Bills had a knife was not correct?
That's correct.
Has Mr. Efron ever identified anybody else other than Mr. Phillips, who we've been calling ASAP 12B, as the person with the knife outside of the parking lot?
No.
On cross-examination, a little bit on Tuesday and into today, I believe mostly on Tuesday, you were asked about whether you reviewed individual videos, and based upon those individual videos, you could tell certain characteristics about the gun. Do you recall that?
Yes,
When you review evidence to determine something like whether a gun is operable, if you have multiple videos, do you view those videos individually to make that determination, or do you view them collectively to make that determination?
collectively, obviously, I look at them individually, but look at them as a whole, and obviously try to put them in sequence with events collectively.
Okay, and I believe you said when you reviewed the video from the parking structure, that individual video, you couldn't say it was an operable gun, correct?
Correct.
But when you review the video collectively, is it your belief that the gun that we see in the defendant's hand was operable?
Objection will be made.
It is.
When you viewed the videos collectively, what was your opinion regarding whether the gun was operational?
It was an operational firearm.
How did you come to that determination?
I mean, in the totality of the circumstances of the first view of the weapon, followed by the second view, the reaction to the incident as the four individuals in the distance in the camera were scrambling, as you can see that something was going on, in conjunction with the sounds of the shots heard from the other camera, and then the fluidity of everybody running through the cameras over to El Centro. That along the lines with the information provided by Mr. Efron, that was my opinion, that it was an operable firearm and that shots had been fired.
Okay. When you reviewed the sequenced surveillance video, were you reviewing whether or not they were sequenced? What were you using to determine whether they were sequenced accurately?
The totality, just the movements of the individuals in the cameras, again, along with, pieces of lights, but a lot of it has to do just with the sequence of events, walking around from one side to the next, and just kind of following the individuals in the video, and obviously in conjunction with the sound. So it sounds more difficult than it is, but it's just kind of collectively putting it all together and watching it.
Okay, from what you were just describing, it sounds like you were using audio and visual cues in the videos, correct?
Yes,
Did you specifically use the timestamps in order to determine if they were sequenced correctly?
no, not exactly. Obviously, I understand from collecting a lot of videos, in a lot of cases that individual surveillance cameras systems are all different, and they all can be off by seconds, hours, depending on how they're maintained and kept and updated. So again, a lot of it has to do with just kind of finding certain markers within whatever crime or whatever we're looking for at the time to try to kind of establish what happened when you're dealing with more than one camera that captures different points of view from different areas.
Okay, when you collect video in your cases and you're checking the timestamps for accuracy, are you checking it down to the fraction of a second?
I mean, it's captured, and we take that into account, and try to determine how far off it may have been. Again, the other factors include that we can't control the maintenance of it, how it's been updated when it's in service.
But to the fraction of a second, that's what you're checking, or are you checking minutes, hours, things like that?
Generally checking minutes, hours, and events captured that coincide with other markers that we do have, whether it's from another camera or a witness or something else that kind of puts us in that right time frame that we're looking for.
As to the videos from the residents on Del Mar, that one that had the audio, council kept using the word rewind. Were those physical tapes that you or your partners collected, or was that digital video?
The camera from 6200 residential is all digital.
Were any of the surveillance cameras in this case captured on manual analog tape, or were they all digital recording?
Now they're all been computers digital.
Okay. At the beginning of his questions of you, Mr. Takapina asked you about whether or not you had spoken to 12E. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you know for a fact that 12E, to this day, still refuses to be interviewed by law enforcement?
Objection, that assumes a fact, not supposed to be necessary.
No, no speaking objections, it's, the objection sustained. Ask another question.
To this day, have you been able to interview 12E?
No.
Have you ever been present when 12E was asked if he would agree to an interview?
Yes.
And what was his answer when asked if he would agree to an interview by law enforcement?
No.
Similarly, you were asked about whether or not you've talked to Mr. Levy. Did you have any indication that before January 20th of 2025, the day before jury selection, that Mr. Levin had any role in this case?
No, not any direct role, no.
Once you were made aware of that he could possibly have anything to say, did you take any efforts to try to interview him or talk to him?
Yes.
Were you successful in those efforts?
No.
Have you been present when Mr. Levin was also present and asked if he would specifically agree to be interviewed by law enforcement?
Yes.
And what was his answer to that question?
No.
As to both 12E and Mr. Levin, did those questions as to whether or not they would agree to an interview with law enforcement, did those occur in this courtroom?
Yes.
Did you or your partners attempt to speak to Mr. Mayor to the defendant?
Yes.
And were you or your partner successful in that effort?
No.
All right, Your Honor, I don't have anything.
Thank you.
Yes, just briefly, Your Honor.
Okay.